Welcome to the In Chamber, the place where we focus on the issues and people that shape business success. I'm your co-host, Rebecca Patrick. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications for the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. Joining me at the microphone is Matt Ottinger, our Director of Digital Media and Legislative Communications. In Chamber is presented by Work and Learn Indiana. Today, we are wrapping up the 2022 legislative session, discussing key measures that passed or didn't and the implications for Hoosier business. Joining us is Indiana Chamber President and CEO, Kevin Brinegar. Kevin, welcome.
Hello, Rebecca, Matt.
The session started off with a bill that would have major implications on the rights of businesses with respect to the pandemic. How was that effort turned around to where, in the end, the passed version is something the Indiana Chamber didn't oppose?
Well, as the question implies, we were staunchly opposed to the bill at the outset because it would have placed restrictions on businesses' abilities to require vaccination mandates and would have imposed tremendous costs on those who chose to do so because they would have had to pay for the testing of those employees who claimed and received various exemptions. I think one of the big things that changed the tenor of this bill over the course of the session, and this particular bill started with hearings back in November and December, even before the legislative session started in full swing in January. And I think the thing that impacted it largely was the U.S. Supreme Court decisions on the OSHA rule, which would have required vaccination mandates for large employers over 100 employees, as well as the so-called CMS rule on healthcare workers, which the Supreme Court upheld the regulation to require those employees who work at facilities that are funded by Medicaid or Medicare, they did have to get their vaccinations or qualify for an exemption. So when the bill got over to the Senate, those Supreme Court decisions had occurred. Some of the landscape had sort of been settled, and we were able to work with Senator Mark Messmer from Jasper, who was the Senate sponsor of the bill, and remove the provisions that we opposed that really interfered with employers' rights to decide what's the best policy with respect to vaccinations for the health and safety of their employees, their customers, and their patients.
The big tax cut package found in House Bill 1002 didn't include everything that the business community wanted, but it did contain some very good policies that will positively impact business and individual taxpayers. Give us the details on that.
Well, we start with the fact that the state of Indiana has had tremendous revenue collections over the past year and a half or so, and each successive revenue forecast has seen a major upward revision, and each month the state has been taking in more revenue than was contained in the monthly revenue forecast. So the state has reached a point where it has literally twice as much in its reserves as is needed and identified by economists and national fiscal experts as prudent to have as reserves to as a hedge against a recession or economic downturn. So the state has the ability to return money back to the taxpayers, and that's what the House of Representatives sought to do with House Bill 1002 when they included legislation in that legislation, a repeal of the utility gross receipts tax, a phase down of the individual income tax, a change in the an expansion of the sales tax exemption for products used in manufacturing process, and something that didn't really affect the state too much, but impacted at the local level, and that's and it was a priority of the chamber, which was the elimination of the 30% depreciation floor on business machine equipment, which required businesses to pay on 30% of the original value, even after the machine or equipment had depreciated below that. Really a completely unfair tax provision because the property taxes should be paid on the actual value of the property, not some artificial floor that is higher. So that was the bill as it passed the House, and we supported all of those provisions, but we knew that it was a pretty ambitious tax policy bill that would have reduced state revenues by about $1.1 billion. The Senate didn't have quite that amount of appetite, in part because they were focused on wanting to set some of this excess surplus aside to pay down the what's called the pre-1996 Teachers Retirement Fund, where prior to 1996, the state pension fund was a pay-as-you-go system where they weren't putting money aside for future indebtedness, but just paying it as it goes. And as a consequence, we had this huge multi-billion-dollar unfunded liability that had built up. Since 1996, the pensions have to be actuarially funded, and the state has been trying to pay down the debt that from the pre-96 portion of that. So we had a difference of opinion between the House and the Senate, and in the end, we had overall a very good outcome. We got several pieces. The Senate fiscal leaders got the commitment to the pension liability that they wanted. We got a repeal of the utility gross receipts tax, which will reduce utility bills for both consumers and businesses, and a phase down of the individual income tax from its current rate of 3.23% to eventually 2.9%, which will make it the lowest income tax rate in the country of the 45 or so states that have an individual income tax. That will also benefit nearly every business in the state, because that'll impact all the pass-through entities, the S corps, the LLCs, the partnerships, who pay their business income tax liability on the individual income tax returns of their owners and shareholders. You
alluded there that really the Senate sort of had other priorities in that bill, and phasing out the business personal property tax really didn't rise to the top for them. But what is your assessment of really, is there anything more beyond that of what happened, and how do you think we can maybe change that circumstance going forward to where the result is more in the favor of the business community?
Well, the Senate fiscal leaders, and these were the majority Republicans, were not as interested in reducing the state's excess budget surplus as the House was. And the business personal property tax, again, was not really have a state impact, but they were persuaded. We were fighting against local government associations, Association of Indiana Counties, the Cities and Towns, as it used to be called, association, were against this legislation because they argued that they were going to lose some property tax revenue. We were able to demonstrate that they weren't going to lose anything off their base, but rather their growth rate, which is estimated to be 3 or 4% a year for the next several years, would be reduced by 0.6%, a very minor impact. But nevertheless, they said, we don't want to lose any revenue. They refused to see the economic stimulus side of this, that if businesses aren't paying as much property tax on their old machinery equipment, they'll have resources to purchase new, which will be added to the tax rolls, and perhaps allow them to also add jobs, which will generate income tax revenue at the local level as well. So they made a simple argument of, don't enact this because we don't want to lose any revenue. And our argument and the real complexity of the issue was much greater. And so it was difficult to make this. And we're going to have to spend time over this legislative interim educating legislators as to the impact, the true impact of this legislation and what it can do, and also how it's just inherently unfair to have to pay property taxes on a value that's higher than what the machine and equipment is actually worth.
Yeah, and Kevin, there's a notion out there that the income tax cuts in House Bill 1002 are somewhat trivial because individual taxpayers are receiving just a small amount back. But can you explain why they are, in fact, quite helpful, especially for pass-through entities?
Well, yeah, for the businesses that have larger income tax liabilities, that will allow them to keep more money, allow them to offset some of the pressures that we're seeing on inflation, which will also be the case with individuals as well. And over time, while each and every year it may not seem like things are stepping down that much, but when this is fully implemented, it'll be nearly a 0.5% drop in our individual income tax rate and on the state income tax rate on these pass-through businesses.
Okay, and moving to the world of politics now, how is the shifting political landscape, perhaps most notably in the evolution of factions in the GOP especially, impacting state legislation and the chamber's political efforts?
Well, we had Charlie Cook, who's a national political observer, participate in our fall board of directors meeting, and he made, I thought, a very accurate point that we're reaching a point in time where both the traditional Republican Party and the traditional Democrat Party are splitting into two factions within those two parties. So you actually have four parties. And what we saw, particularly with House Bill 1001 and the vaccination mandate, was a strong pushback on President Biden's executive orders requiring vaccinations for the large employers, for any company that's a federal contractor, and the employees of any company that receive Medicaid or Medicare money. They felt that these were the folks who were anti-vaccine, who felt that they shouldn't be required to get a vaccine. And from a political standpoint, particularly on the House side, the Republican majority, many of those members wanted to push back and put a stake in the ground that we object to what the president's doing. That actually occurred in several other states where they passed out and out prohibitions against vaccination requirements, which were in direct conflict with the president's executive order, which said for the larger companies that you must vaccinate. And our employer community was caught in the middle of this power struggle. And so House Bill 1001 was a byproduct of that. The notion that they were going to try to pass this legislation in a one-day special session back in November before the regular session even started in January was out of the desire to show their voting base that they had done something to, show Joe Biden that, we're not going to stand for what you're proposing in these regulations. And with the idea that by doing so, they would forestall primary opponents from running against them, because the primary opponents were arguing that they weren't doing anything. So all of House Bill 1001 in particular was wrapped up in politics, as was House Bill 1134, which was the bill over the school curriculum and what's referred to as critical race theory. And that was, again, part of that. And then thirdly was the bill that ultimately ended up in House Bill 1296 regarding removing the requirement that you go get a license and a permit with respect to handguns, or the so-called constitutional carry, was another politically charged matter where you had the Republican majority trying to play to the farthest right elements of its party base.
Okay, and then I've got what's generally a fun question after session. What's the most obscure bill, not necessarily business related even, but that you came across during the legislative session?
As I recall, there was a bill to name a state fossil. And so you get, bills like that. We've had recent years, the bill to name a state insect, to name a state pie, which of course is the sugar cream pie. So you get those kinds of bills. We've had, and we've kind of chuckled about the, although it's a serious effort, the bill to require cursive writing. And so you get some things that are pretty narrow, maybe for one particular constituency or one legislator's idea about what the state's recognized item should be. I've often joked and said if I was ever elected to General Assembly, I would, the first bill I would file would be a bill to make my mother's persimmon pudding the official state pudding for Indiana.
Well, it's not a bill, but another thing that's sort of near and dear to us is a resolution.
Yes.
We had at the General Assembly celebrating and recognizing the Chamber's 100 years. So that was very nice as well.
Yeah, it was indeed. The Indiana Chamber celebrated its 100th year of incorporation on February 2nd. And I had the pleasure of going over to the Indiana Senate where the resolution started. It was a concurrent resolution recognized by both the House and the Senate. Very impressive looking document. And our board chair this year, John Thompson, joined me, and we were recognized with the resolution, which was voted on by the entire Senate, Indiana Senate, as well as the House of Representatives. And we're very grateful for them for taking the time to recognize the Chamber and its long history.
Now a quick word about our sponsor. Work and Learn Indiana is where work-based learning connections are made. It's free, it's easy, it's a win for both Indiana learners and employers. Its newly updated website hosts Indiana's largest statewide marketplace of work and learn opportunities that promotes talent and career development. Details at workandlearnindiana.com.
The big economic development measure found in Senate Bill 361 could really be a game changer in several ways when it comes to talent and business attraction. What exactly will that new law do?
Well, it will, in a summary form, it will modernize the Indiana Economic Development Corporation's toolkit. It will also give them greater flexibility. Currently, they have funds appropriated for specific programs that I think of as being appropriated in silos, where the money appropriated for that particular program can only be used for that program. This will create an overall cap on IEDC incentive funds, and where needed, give them the flexibility to move monies from one fund and one program to another to be able to close deals in a more effective way. The bill also includes a median film incentive program. Many other states, I see it from time to time, the Georgia films, or the reference to some other state, and where they're attracting a lot of movie making and filming, and they're doing so with a film and media credit incentive. This bill also includes a state, kind of a state level TIF program to develop funds to create a deal making fund as well. So this is an important piece of legislation to modernize our economic development toolkit.
I believe it included what originally started out in Senate Bill 4.
Yes.
The remote worker.
Yes. Well, actually not remote worker. That was in the original bill and got pulled out. But Senate Bill 4, similar to the allowing flexibility of use of funds at the state level, was a bill that the Chamber developed and promoted and was ultimately incorporated into Senate Bill 361, which will allow local units of government to take excess funds that they may have in a particular account or program and pool those into funds that they can use for talent attraction and retention.
Which may or may not be a remote worker.
Yeah, correct.
There were several policy priorities that were long sought by the Indiana Chamber that passed this session. Urging completion of the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, for high school seniors was one of those. Talk about that bill specifically and the persistence it often takes to get good policy across the finish line.
Well, with this bill, boy, does it ever. This is the fourth year that we have pursued this legislation, and our interest is out of the fact that Indiana's completion rate of the FAFSA form, which is the key to unlock the door for student aid, grants, and other assistance, not only for lower income Hoosier families, not only for four-year bachelor's degrees, but associate's degrees, certificates, and even is required for the state's next level jobs funding and training programs. Our FAFSA filing rate has been the lowest in the Midwest for several years and one of the lowest in the nation. And both here in Indiana and across the country, the filing rates and participations has fallen dramatically during the pandemic, in part because during the learning at home and the e-learning, students haven't been at their high schools to be able to interact and get assistance from their high school guidance counselors. We thought it was important to establish this as a requirement and to get this information in the hands of parents and get them some assistance where needed in filing the FAFSA form so that they could find out what their students might be eligible for, which could further their post-secondary careers. 4 years ago, the bill passed the House and died in the Senate. 3 years ago, it passed the Senate and died in the House. And last year, it passed both the House and the Senate, but then died in conference committee. This year, it got all the way to the governor's desk, and we're confident that he will sign it. We did have to step back on the bill and step away from making it a requirement. There will be a pilot program for some districts to where they make it a requirement, as well as the information that the schools will be required rather to push this information out to the families and also give them information on not only how to, that the forms are available and what they can lead to, but also provide them online assistance in filling out the forms. We can tell you that in Louisiana several years ago, which had the lowest FAFSA filing rate in the country, when they made it a requirement for every student and family to fill that out, unless they chose to opt out because they maybe made high enough income that they weren't going to be eligible. Louisiana, in just a few years, went from the lowest FAFSA filing rate in the country to the highest. And that's what we'd like to see, because this we see as a critical component of lifting up the skills of our adult workforce, which right now we're in the bottom third of the states. And as we look to the future, we think that our biggest challenges are workforce.
Looking at everything that happened this session, what is the chamber most happy about, and what were we most disappointed in seeing or not seeing?
I think we're most happy about the fact that there were a lot of very anti-business bills when the session first started and bills were introduced. And we seemed this year to have a lot of legislators who thought they knew how to run our members' businesses better than the members themselves. And I was very pleased that week by week, we began knocking these bad bills down, working with committee chairs and explaining our positions and explaining why these would have negative impacts on bills, and working with the governor's office for that matter. So being able to do that while at the same time passing a number of the chamber priority bills that we've talked about here in the interview today, and others, including some that we've been working on for several years and finally have gotten across the finish line, such as the FAFSA bill and the workers' compensation bill. So those, I think, are the things that I'm most happy and proud about. The biggest disappointment, clearly, it was the Senate's absolute refusal, despite support from the House majority and from the governor, to eliminate the 30% depreciation floor that we talked about earlier. They just would not budge on that. And frankly, I'm disappointed in the associations at the counties levels and the cities and towns level with their staunch opposition and their unwillingness to see the economic stimulus and growth potential of eliminating that tax that would free up money for businesses to invest in new machinery and equipment and modernization so they can stay competitive and keep people employed in communities across the state.
And Kevin, along those lines, what did you find most surprising about this session?
Well, the first and biggest surprise might have been the phone call I got from Speaker Houston the day after Organization Day back in November, when they said they were going to introduce a bill that would restrict employers' abilities to set their own vaccination mandate policies and would have significant cost to employers. And so it was like, wow, that came out of left field. And then having to work on and fight that and sit through 2 7-hour hearings even before the session actually started in January. So that was a big surprise. And then related to that was just the number of anti-business bills that were filed by the General Assembly in January during that bill filing period, and the number of things that we had to fight to knock down. So we ended up playing more defense than we would have expected, particularly in a short session. But I'm really proud of our chamber advocacy team and how they've advocated and got these bills knocked down, so that then by the end we could focus on the positive bills that we were pushing through the session.
And what are the impending key happenings between now and the 2023 session? I know it's early, but aside from the budget, what will be the most pressing issues in the next session?
Well, first and foremost, we have to see who the players are going to be. We have a significant number of competitive primary elections, and then we'll have the general election. So we're going to have a number of new legislators, if for no other reason than there are a number of legislators retiring, plus there will be turnover. So we have to see who the players are. But for the chamber, looking forward, it really is going to be workforce, and all the way from the pre-K level, getting kids ready to learn and where they need to be when they start in the first grade, improving the outcomes within our K-12 system. Right now, our iLearn results are frankly abysmal, and we have too many kids that are falling out of the system who aren't prepared for the rigors and the requirements after they leave high school, and then doing everything we can to lift up the skills of our adult workforce to make sure to increase the percentage of our population that has post-secondary credentials and that are ready to compete effectively in a 21st century workforce. We have initial indications that despite our tremendously positive business and regulatory climate, that we're starting to lose out on some business investment decisions and big projects because it is perceived that we don't necessarily have the workforce with the skills needed to meet the demands of those companies and the investments that they're making.
Thanks, Kevin, for sharing your insights. I know the Chamber will continue communicating to its members and the business community on public policy throughout the year. In Chamber is presented by Work and Learn Indiana. As always, thank you for listening.